Armored
April
Division
15,
liberates
1945.
Bergen-Belsen, one of the
British
worst Nazi
soldiers
concentration
enter
camps
Bergen-Belsen
and
concentration
its death
camp
camps.
and discover
The
something
British
that would haunt
forces
them
find
forever.
13,000
Among
unburied
13,000
who are
rotting
sick
corpses
and starved.
and 60,000
Thousands of
dying
other
prisoners,
inmates will die
they
of
found
various
her,
diseases during the
a
months following the
21-year-old
camp's
blonde
liberation.
woman who
The
survivors
British
called
forces
the
capture
Beautiful
male
Beast.
responsible for these horrors
This is the
and
chilling
force them to
story
help
of
bury
Irma
the dead
Grese
bodies in
and
mass
how
graves.
justice finally caught the
Famous
Hyena of
perpetrators
Auschwitz.
of the criminal Nazi
Before we
regime
dive into this disturbing
Irma Grese.
chapter of history, hit that
1923,
subscribe button
in
and
Brechen,
turn on
then part of the
notifications for
Weimar
History of
Republic,
Army.
which was the
We bring you
government of
the
Jones III
untold
of 5
stories from
children,
warfare
and both
and
her
military
parents were
history
dairy
that
workers.
changed our world.
Adolf Hitler.
Now, let's
The
expose the
Nazis were
truth
skilled
about one of Nazi
propagandists who
Germany's
used
most
sophisticated
sadistic
advertising
killers.
techniques.
Liberation
the Hitler
of
Youth and League
Hell.
of German Girls were
Southwest of
developed as
Bergen
Nazi
in
Party
Nazi
youth
Germany,
groups.
the
To
British
introduce these
11th
youth
Armored
groups
Division
also
rolled
prepared
into what
Germany's
can
young
only be
people for
described
war.
as humanity's
Because
darkest
Irma's father
nightmare.
youth organizations,
Bergen-Belsen
even though they
concentration
wanted
camp
to.
stood as a
However,
monument
it was
to
impossible
evil,
to avoid
a
an
place where
important
the
role in
Nazi
spreading
regime's
Nazi
true
ideas
face
to the
was
German
finally
youth.
revealed to the world.
From their first days at
What
school,
the
his
liberators
portrait was a
witnessed
standard
defied
fixture in all
comprehension.
classrooms.
Mountains
While
of
census
skeletal
removed
corpses
some
lay
that
scattered
taught
across
students
the camp.
love for Hitler,
Nearly
obedience to state
60,000
authority,
prisoners, living
militarism,
skeletons riddled with
her mother
typhus
committed
and
suicide
tuberculosis
following the
barely
discovery of
clung
her
to
husband's
life.
affair,
In the
was
months
only by her
following
father,
liberation,
Alfred
thousands
Grese,
more
a
would
devout
perish
Christian
from diseases
who was very stern
contracted
and
in
strict with
captivity.
his children. In school,
British forces
Irma Grese
immediately
performed
arrested the
poorly in
Nazi
academics.
personnel responsible for
According
these
to Irma's
atrocities.
sister, only 14.
They forced these
She
perpetrators
then
to
stayed for
bury the
6
victims
months on
in
a farm,
mass graves,
working an
a
agricultural
fraction
job,
of the
months
justice
as
these
well.
monsters deserved.
In 1935,
Among those
at the age of
captured
15,
was a young woman
Grese
whose
went to
cruelty
nurse for
would
about
shock
2 years
even
and
hardened
trained under the
military
sanatorium's
veterans.
medical
Her name was
superintendent,
Irma
Karl
Grese,
Gebhardt, on
and she was
Ravensbrück
just
Concentration
getting
Camp
started on
inmates
her
during the
path to
Second World
infamy.
War.
The making
Grese
of
wanted
a
to become a
monster.
full 41
Born
at the age of
October
17.
7th,
She was instead
1923
sent to a
in
dairy
Brechen,
farm in
Germany.
Fürstenberg,
Irma
where
Ilse
ration
Ida
camps
Grese
began in
seemed
July
destined for an
1942.
ordinary life.
When she arrived in
She was the
Ravensbrück
third
Concentration
of 5 children in a working-class
was the only
family
major
of
women's
dairy
camp
workers.
established by the
Nothing
Nazis.
about her childhood suggested she would become one of
including
history's
Poles,
most notorious
Russians,
war criminals.
Jews,
But
gypsies, and other
1933
women
changed
perished.
everything. Adolf
Ravensbrück
Hitler
camp
and
was
his
staffed
Nazi
both by
party
SS
seized
men
power,
who served
unleashing
as
sophisticated
supervisors.
propaganda that
These female
poisoned an entire
supervisors were
generation.
either SS
The
volunteers,
Hitler Youth and
also
League of
housed a
German
training
Girls
camp for female
transformed
SS
children
guards,
into
who were taught by
fanatics,
Dorothea
preparing them
Binz,
for
the
war
prisoners
and
that they were going
genocide.
to supervise.
Irma's father, a
These
devout
prisoners
Christian,
would have to work until
despised
they
the
died,
Nazis.
was to get
He
the maximum
refused to let
amount
his
of work
children
out of
join
them
the party's
whilst
youth
they were still
organizations,
alive.
even when they
Ravensbrück
begged.
Dams.
But his resistance
Starting
proved
in the
futile.
summer of 1942,
Nazi indoctrination
SS medical
infected
doctors
every
subjected to
classroom.
Oberhäuser
Teachers
and
replaced
Fritz Fischer.
education with worship
They
of
often
Hitler.
used a hammer
Students
to break
learned
BT
to hate
soldiers.
before they
They
learned
also
to
tested
read
various
critically.
methods of setting
Tragedy
and
struck in
transplanting bones.
1936 when
Such
Irma was
experiments
just
anesthesia.
13. Her
The
mother
SS
committed
selected nearly 80
suicide
women,
after discovering her
mostly Polish
husband's
result.
affair.
Those who
The already
survived
stern
often
Alfred
suffered
Grese
permanent
became
physical
even
damage.
harsher, frequently
SS
using
doctored
physical
many of them
violence to
Roma
discipline
people
his children.
in an attempt to develop an
Young
efficient
Irma,
method of
bullied relentlessly
sterilization.
at school and
Nor 8
brutalized
months
at home,
pregnant.
found
In
no
addition to these
refuge
forced
anywhere.
abortions, they
Academic
were also
failure
known for the
led
beating
Grese
of
to
pregnant
drop out
from
at 14.
Hohenlichen Sanatorium.
She drifted
And it
through
is believed that at
jobs, 6
Ravensbrück,
months on a farm,
Grese was
6 months
exposed
in
to
retail,
atrocities
2
which
years
might have
as an
had a
assistant
damaging
nurse at
impact on her
Hohenlichen
personality.
Sanatorium. There,
and
she
told her
worked under
family that she
Karl
was
Gebhardt,
supervising the
a
prisoners
Nazi
working
doctor
inside
who
the
would later
compound at
conduct
Ravensbrück for a
grotesque
whip
medical
and
experiments
forbade
on
her from coming
concentration
home
camp
again.
prisoners.
In
Grese
March
wanted to become a full
1943,
nurse, but her poor
it was
academic
divided
record
into
blocked
10
that
sections,
path.
separated
Instead,
by
at
electrified
17,
barbed wire fences.
she was sent to operate a butter machine
SS
at a
dog
dairy
handlers.
farm. A dead-end
During its 3
job,
years of
a wasted
operation,
life,
in
or so it
1941,
seemed.
it was
Then,
supposed
in
to be
July
a camp for 125,000
everything
from March
changed.
1942,
Irma Grese
and
arrived at
served at the same
Ravensbrück
time as a center
Concentration
for the
Camp.
extermination of
Her
Jews.
transformation from
So it became
nobody
a place
to
where prisoners
nightmare
were
was about to
concentrated
begin.
before being
School
transferred to
of
labor in the
violence.
German industry.
Ravensbrück
Sister
was
Helena.
Nazi Germany's
When
only
Irma was a
major
little
women's
girl, she was
concentration
frightened
camp.
to stand up for
Opened
herself.
in May
Grese
1939,
found
it
herself
would
for the first
ultimately
time
imprison
in a position to strike people
132,000 women from
and
across
she earned her
Europe,
infamous
Poles,
nicknames, the
Russians,
Hyena of
Jews,
Auschwitz,
Roma, and
the
others.
Beautiful Beast,
Over
to her
92,000
taking
would
lovers from the
never
male
live
and female
alive.
populace of
The
Birkenau.
camp employed employed both
She was
male
also
SS
alleged to
guards
have
and
a former
150
Auschwitz
female
prisoner
supervisors.
said about Irma,
These women
she
either
was one of the most
volunteered for the
beautiful women,
SS or
angelic,
took the job
and her
for
blue
excellent
eyes the
pay and
gayest,
working conditions.
the most innocent eyes one could
Ravensbrück
imagine.
also served as a
Others
training
I've ever
facility,
come
a
across.
school of
In
violence,
her memoir,
where
Five
approximately
Chimneys,
3,500
Auschwitz
female
survivors, many
guards
other
learned
Nazis
the
as well.
art of murder.
When it came time to
Dorothea
select
Binz,
women for the
a
gas
sadistic
chamber,
Nazi
led
officer,
beautiful
ran the
female
training
prisoners
program.
due to jealousy
She
and
taught
spite.
trainees trainees like Grese
However,
how to
there
extract
were female
maximum
prisoners
work
of
from
Nina
prisoners until they
then
literally
16
died
years
from
old,
exhaustion.
whom Grese told that she looked like her sister and look out
Prisoners
girl.
were
When Irma
disposable
held lesbian
tools,
orgies in
not human
barracks
beings.
and watched out so that
Starting
nobody
in
would
summer
interrupt them. And when she
1942,
grew bored of them,
SS
she
doctors
would select them for
subjected
the gas
Ravensbrück
chamber to be
prisoners to
killed.
horrific medical
She also
experiments.
beat and refused
Karl
Grese's
Gebhardt,
advances toward
Grace's
him.
former boss
He
from
had to watch
Hohenleichen,
Irma dragging his
coordinated
naked
these
girlfriend that she was
atrocities.
having affairs with
Doctors
Jewish
deliberately
inmates who
broke
were
women's
deemed
legs
racially
with
inferior.
hammers, then
He ended
infected
his
the wounds with
relationship with her.
bacteria to
Despite this
test
relationship,
antibiotics.
Grese had
They
so many lovers
amputated
at one
limbs
point,
and
she
transplanted
developed
bones,
sexually transmitted
often
numerous
without
abortions.
anesthesia. Nearly
Dr.
80
Gisela
women,
Perl
mostly
performed
Polish
one of these
prisoners,
abortions
suffered
at
through these
Auschwitz.
barbaric
Grese held
experiments.
various positions
Many
within the
died.
camp.
Survivors
At
bore
first,
permanent physical
charge of
and
the commando,
psychological scars.
which carried stones from the
SS
outside
doctors also
into the
performed
camp.
forced sterilizations
She received
and
orders
abortions,
of the commando making
even
the roads
beating
inside
pregnant
the camp
women to cause
and the gardening
miscarriages
work.
and murdering newborns.
In May 1940,
At
during 8
18
weeks
years
from the
old,
15th of
Grese
May
worked as an
to the 9th of
assistant
July,
nurse during these experiments.
1944.
This
Hungarians
exposure to
Birkenau,
systematic
where
cruelty
upon arrival
warped her
and
psychology,
after selection,
transforming
SS
a
functionaries
bullied
killed the
dropout
majority.
into a violent
Grese would
sadist.
become the senior
When she
guard
returned
of
home in
Birkenau's lager
1943
or
and
camp
told her
C, the
family she
28
supervised
blocks where
prisoners
prisoners
at
were
Ravensbrück,
accommodated,
her father
as
gave
well as
her a
other blocks
severe
such as a
beating
food
and
block,
banished
2
her from the
wash
house
houses.
forever.
Normally,
It was
the
already
accommodation
too
would
late.
only have been
Irma
suitable for
Grese had
100
found
or
her calling.
crowded. That
The
Grese had
Hyena of
1,000
Auschwitz.
prisoners in
March
each block.
1943,
In some of the
Grese
block,
received
not bunks.
deployment orders to
In Grese's lager
Auschwitz-Birkenau
C,
in German-occupied
there were approximately
Poland.
30,000
This
prisoners
massive
tested,
complex
were
served multiple
Czechoslovaks.
functions:
The block
prisoner of war
Altessa,
camp,
block
forced
or back
labor
conditions were
facility,
horrible.
and
The
extermination
latrine
center
ceased
where
to function,
industrial-scale
and Grese
genocide
would later
occurred
describe how
daily.
wherever you went,
Birkenau
in the
sprawled
camp,
across
she
10
was infamous
sections
for carrying her
separated by
woven leather whip,
electrified barbed
which was
wire
covered from
fences.
it.
SS
She would
guards
stand
with
at the
attack
gate
dogs
when the
patrolled
working parties were
constantly.
going out and coming in,
Construction began in
and regularly
October
proudly say,
1941 for
"It was a very light whip, but
125,000
if I hit
prisoners of
somebody
war.
with it, it
By
would
March
hurt."
1942, it
The
also
most
became a
frequent
center for
reasons to whip the
exterminating
prisoners
Jews.
were that they
From
stole food because they
1944
were
onward,
from 3
it
a.m.
concentrated
until
prisoners
9 a.m.
before
The
transferring
prisoners
them
had
to
to stand
slave
still.
labor in German
When they
factories.
moved running to and
Remember
from,
that
and
bullied
she could
little
not
girl
count them
who ran
properly.
from fights?
Her
That
other
version of
specialty,
Irma Grese
large stone
died at
above their heads
Auschwitz.
in each hand,
For the first
and if
time
they
in her
faltered,
miserable
she would
life,
beat them.
she wielded
On one
absolute
occasion,
power over
gave
people who
strict orders
couldn't
to
fight
return
back,
all sorts
and
of
she
things produced out
absolutely
of these
loved
blankets
it.
at once.
Grese
And
earned
prisoners who
2
had these
chilling
things in their
nicknames:
possession
the
were
Hyena of
brutally
Auschwitz
whipped.
and
In
the
addition to
Beautiful
a whip,
Beast.
Grese's favorite
Her
habit was to
cruelty
beat
and
women
brutality
until they
became
were bleeding
legendary
and fell
among
to the
prisoners.
ground, and then
She was
kicked them as
also
hard as a woman who was
sexually
talking to her
deviant,
daughter
taking
over
lovers
the
from
wire
both
fence
male
between the
and
two
female
compounds.
camp populations.
Grese, bees and
Rumors
kicked
swirled about
sections of
affairs
veteran
with Joseph
female inmates
Mengele,
for gas
the infamous
chambers.
Angel of Death,
With her
and
lover,
Joseph
doctor, when the
Kramer,
women were sent to the
commandant of
gas chambers.
Auschwitz-Birkenau and
Grese
later
entered that up in her
Bergen-Belsen.
books
Dr.
as
Gisela
special
Perl, an
and
Auschwitz
inspected like
survivor,
cattle
described
to be
Grese
selected
this
whether
way:
they were fit enough
"She
to
was
work
one
in
of the
Germany
most
or
beautiful
only
women
run
I have
away.
ever seen.
She would bring her back to
body
give her
was
a beating.
perfect in every
When she
line.
saw relatives
her
trying
face
to get
clear
together
and
and leave them
angelic,
lying on the
and her
ground.
blue eyes the
The female
gayest, the
prisoners
most
that tried to
innocent
escape
eyes
such
one can
elections
imagine.
to the place
And
and
yet,
were then put
Irma
back in their
Grese
lines
was the
again.
most depraved,
During
cruel,
one such selection,
imaginative
when 2
pervert
girls
I
after
ever
the
came
war,
across.
Alice learned the reason
Survivor
Grese
Olga
had saved
Lengyel
her so
wrote
many
that during
times
selections
was
for the
because
gas
she looked like
chambers,
huge dogs
Grese
that she
deliberately
starved.
chose the most
Survivors
beautiful
recalled her
female
riding
prisoners
around the
out of
camp on a
jealousy and
bicycle
spite.
with a dog's
These women would be stripped
Those who
naked,
could not keep up with a
inspected
column,
like cattle,
she ordered the
then
dogs to
sent to their
attack.
deaths.
On one of
Yet
the camp,
Grese showed
the female
favoritism
prisoners
towards certain
hesitated
prisoners who
and lost
reminded
control
her
of
of her
their wagon,
sister Helene.
throwing stones
Nina
over the whole
Koleska,
area.
then 16,
One
served
survivor
as
later
Grace's
testified
messenger
what
and
happened
lookout
afterward
during lesbian
to escape
orgies
their
in the
fangs,
barracks.
but the
When
trained
Grace
killers
tired of her
easily
sexual
overtook
partners,
them.
she selected
The
them
dogs
for
were
the gas
tapped.
chambers.
Her eyes
When
were
a handsome
bloodshot.
Georgian man
The
refused
sight
her
of blood seemed
advances,
to intoxicate
Grace
her.
dragged his naked girlfriend around
Sometimes when
camp by
Grese
the
went out
hair,
with her working
then whipped her
parties,
mercilessly.
she used to beat women
She
and kick
forced
them
the
with her
man to
heavy
watch
by
this
the wire
torture
fence
before
where they
having
were
him
working,
shot
to
and
make it
sending
appear
his
that they were
girlfriend to
attempting
the
to
camp
escape.
brothel.
And
When
when ones that
Mengele
they had been
discovered
sent over
Grace's affairs
deliberately,
with Jewish
Grese
inmates,
gave evidence at
violation
an
of
inquiry
Nazi
against
racial
the scar.
purity laws,
Irma
he
also had a
ended their
choice of the
relationship.
finest clothing from all
But
over
Grese
Europe.
simply
Grese
moved
had her
on,
dresses tailored, was
eventually
particularly
falling
fond fond of a
love
sky
with
blue jacket
SS
with a dark blue
engineer
tie.
Franz Wolfgang
Irma
Hotzinger.
would spend hours in for movie
Still,
star.
she continued
Grese
taking
once
multiple
declared,
lovers,
"After the war,
contracting
I'm
sexually
going to be it."
transmitted
However,
diseases,
she
and
was wrong.
undergoing numerous
Irma Grese
abortions.
left Auschwitz on the
Reign
18th
of
of January
Terror.
to the Auschwitz Concentration Camp
Grace's
complex,
career at
and the
Auschwitz
SS began
involved
evacuating
various
Auschwitz
positions.
and its subcamps.
She worked telephone
Which is,
duties,
the
supervised
prisoners had
stone-carrying
to march over long
details,
distances
managed
under
road
guard
construction
and a
crews,
large number
and
of
oversaw
Ravensbrück
gardening
prisoners
work.
in March 1945.
In May
Those who
1944,
collapsed,
the
and there
Hungarian
was no
Jewish
food when they
genocide
arrived at the
began.
camp either.
Over 8
According
weeks,
to the inmates, who were
Hungarian
lucky enough to
officials
survive,
under German
consisted
SS
of watery
guidance
soup made from a
deported
variety of
approximately
turnips cooked in water, and
424,000
such
Jews
conditions
to
at Bergen-Belsen
Auschwitz-Birkenau.
were terrible.
Upon
and there was no
arrival,
water for washing.
SS functionaries
and hard
murdered the
that during
majority
the
in
winter
gas
months when it was
chambers.
freezing cold,
That
the
same
prisoners had to
month,
sleep
at
in a
age
sitting
20,
position on the blankets
Grese
in
became
a camp
senior
of tens
guard
of
of
thousands of
Birkenau's
prisoners.
Lager C,
In March
supervising
1945,
6 or
due to
7
average daily
rotating female
mortality rate of
guards.
the prisoners
Camp
was between
C contained
250
28
and
blocks for
300.
prisoner
Works
accommodation,
were so
plus
dirty and
blocks
ill
for food,
until the bitter
clothing
end.
storage, latrines,
Even
and
also making them
washhouses.
kneel and hold
Blocks
stones
designed
over
for
their heads.
100 to
They were
300
also
prisoners
forced to stand
held
from 3 to
1,000
9
each.
a.m.
In total,
Despite the
Camp
fact that
C
people were
imprisoned
dying
approximately
all around the Bergen,
30,000
beating them with a rubber
Hungarians.
truncheon. But she
Some
would also
blocks had
submit them to
bunks for
punitive
5
physical
people.
exercises,
Most
in
had
which
no beds
until they collapsed
whatsoever.
from exhaustion.
Sanitary conditions
About a
collapsed.
fortnight before the British
Latrines
troops
stopped
arrived,
functioning.
eating a girl
Human
with a riding
waste
crop.
covered the ground
Upon the
everywhere.
eve of liberation, Grese
Grese
knocked together
carried
the
a
head,
woven leather whip
even though
wrapped
she
in
worked at the camp for
cellophane
only
so
3.5
blood would wash
weeks.
off easily.
She was so cruel.
She stationed herself at
1945,
gates where work
2 days
parties
after
entered and
Bergen-Belsen's
exited,
liberation,
beating
Irma Grese
inmates
was criminal
purely for
colleagues,
enjoyment.
such as Josef Kramer,
Later,
the
she
commandant of
proudly stated,
Auschwitz-Birkenau,
"It was
and the
a
last
very
commandant
light
of
whip,
Bergen-Belsen
but if I
guards,
hit
were
somebody with it,
temporarily
it would
imprisoned
hurt."
in a Wehrmacht Panzer
Even
training
Commandant
academy.
Josef
About the
Kramer
time when
ordered
she
her
was
to stop
interviewed by
using
an
the
English
whip.
journalist
She
who asked her
ignored
why
him
she had committed the
completely.
crime she had.
Prisoners received
It was our
beatings for
duty
stealing
to
food out of
exterminate
starvation
antisocial
or
elements,
arriving late
so that
to roll
Grese,
calls.
when she was tried at
These
the
roll
Belsen
calls
trial,
lasted
which
from
began on the
3 a.m. to
17th of
9 a.m.
September, 1945,
Prisoners stood
SS women in the
motionless.
camp.
Any
Grese
movement
responded
brought
that they were all
beatings or
lying,
forced kneeling for
exaggerating,
hours.
and making it to the beatings,
Grese made
but
them
never
hold
killing
large
anyone.
stones above
However,
their heads
her
with
lies
outstretched
did not help
arms.
her escape. The
When
British
they
military
faltered,
tribunal
she beat them
sentenced Irma
savagely.
Grese to
When
death by
prisoners
hanging.
cut blankets to make
She was
shoes or
carried out the
jackets,
sentence on the 13th
Grese
of
ordered
December,
everything returned
1945.
immediately.
Wash
When
now,
nothing appeared,
meaning quickly.
she conducted block
Grese
searches
was the
and
youngest woman
brutally
to die
whipped
judicially
anyone
under
possessing these
British
makeshift
shed.
items.
For Irma
Besides
Grese.
her whip, Grese used a walking
Sister
stick
Helena.
for beatings.
When Irma
Her
was a
favorite
little
method
girl, she
involved
was
beating
frightened to
women
stand up
until
for
they
herself.
bled and collapsed,
Grese found
then
herself for the
kicking them
first
with heavy
time
boots.
in a position to strike
Once,
people.
she saw a woman
and she
talking
owed
to her
infamous
daughter through a
nicknames,
wire
the
fence,
Hyena of
separating
Auschwitz
compounds.
and the beautiful beast,
Grese
to her
beat and kicked
taking
the woman
lovers from the
until she
male and
lay
female
motionless
populace
on
of
the ground.
Birkenau. She was
She
also alleged to have
participated in
a
selections
former
with
Auschwitz
Mengele,
prisoner said
determining
about
who
Irma.
lived to
She
work
was one of the
and
most
who died
beautiful
in
women
gas
angelic,
chambers.
and her blue
Women
eyes the
paraded
gayest,
naked
the
for
most
inspection
innocent
like
eyes one
cattle.
could imagine.
Grese
I have
maintained
ever come
order,
across.
beating
In
anyone
her
who
memoir,
tried to
5
escape
Chimneys,
or reunite
Auschwitz
with
survived
relatives
of many
during
other Nazis
selections.
as well. When it
Those
came
caught
time to
fleeing
select women for the
selections
gas
received
chamber, the beautiful
unconsciousness-inducing
female
beatings
prisoners, due
before
to
being
jealousy
thrown
and
back in
spite.
line.
However,
During one
there were
selection,
female prisoners
2
of Nina
girls jumped from a
Kaleska,
window
then
trying to
16 years
escape.
old, whom Grese
Grese
told that she
calmly
looked like
shot
a sit
them both
and
with
lookout
her
girl. When
ever-present
Irma held
loaded
lesbian
pistol.
orgies in barracks
Yet,
and watched out so that
Grese
nobody
saved
would
some
interrupt them.
prisoners.
And when she grew bored
She
of them,
rescued
she would select them for
14-year-old
the gas
Alice
chamber to be
Tenenbaum from the
killed.
gas chamber
She also
16
beat
times,
and refused
pulling
Grese's
her out
advances
after
toward him.
Mengele
He
selected
had
her
to
for
watch
death.
Irma dragging his naked
After the
girlfriend
war,
that she was having affairs with
Tenenbaum
Jewish
learned
inmates
Grese saved
who were
her
deemed
only
racially
because she
inferior.
resembled Irma's
He ended
sister,
his relationship
Helene.
with her. Despite this relationship,
Grese starved
Grese had
2
so many
huge
lovers at one
dogs,
point.
then used
She
them as
developed
weapons.
sexually transmitted numerous
She
abortions.
rode a bicycle alongside
Dr.
female
Gisela Perl
inmates during their
performed one of these abortions
16-kilometer
at
trek to
Auschwitz.
work.
Grese held various
Those who
positions
couldn't
within
keep
the
pace
camp.
faced attack
At
dogs.
first,
When a
charge of the
wagon
commando,
carrying stones
which carried
lost
stones
control
from the
and
outside
capsized,
into the camp.
Grese unleashed her dogs
She
on the
received
women.
orders of the commando making the
One
roads inside
survivor
the camp
testified,
and the gardening
"The
work.
dogs were tearing
In
at
May
the girls'
1940,
bodies.
during 8 weeks
Irma
from the
came
15th of
closer
May
to observe.
the 9th of July,
Her eyes were
1944,
bloodshot.
Hungarians
The
at
sight of
Birkenau,
blood seemed
where
to
upon arrival
intoxicate her.
and after selection,
Throughout this
SS
carnage,
functionaries killed the
Grese
majority.
smiled.
Grese would become
She
the
sent
senior
women
guard
outside
of
wire
Birkenau's
fences
lager,
during work
or Camp
details
C,
to
of
make them
28
appear to
blocks
be
where
escaping.
prisoners were accommodated.
When one guard
as well as other
refused to
blocks such
shoot
as a
women,
food
Grese
block,
had
2
deliberately
washhouses.
sent across the fire
Normally,
fence.
the
She
accommodation
testified
would only
against
have been
him at an
suitable
inquiry.
for 100 or
Thanks
crowded.
to plundered
But Grese had
belongings of murdered
1,000
victims,
prisoners in
Grese
each
wore
block.
the finest
In
clothing
some of
from
the block,
across
not
Europe.
bunks.
Jewish
In Grese's Lager
dressmakers,
C,
now prisoners,
there were approximately
tailored her clothes.
30,000 prisoners tested,
She particularly
were
loved a
Czechoslovaks.
sky blue
The
jacket
block
with dark
Altessa,
blue tie.
block or back conditions
She
were
spent
horrible.
hours styling
Then
her
a train
hair and
ceased to
admiring
function
herself in
And
mirrors,
Grese would later describe how
fantasizing
wherever
about
you went
post-war film
in the
stardom.
camp, she was
After
infamous
the
for
war,
carrying her
I
woven
am
leather
going to
whip,
be in films.
which was covered from
You
it.
will see my name
She would
as a
stand at the
star on the
gate
screen.
where the working parties were
She
going
would
out and
never
coming
see
in,
any
and
screen
regularly
except
proudly
the
say,
inside of a
"It was a very
courtroom.
light whip, but if I
Death
hit
March
somebody
and
with it,
Final
it would
Crimes.
hurt."
January 18,
The most frequent reasons to whip the
1945.
prisoners
Soviet
were that they
forces
stole food
approached
because they were
Auschwitz.
from 3 a.m.
The
until
SS
9
began
a.m.
evacuating
The prisoners had to
complex
stand
through
still.
forced death
When
marches.
they moved, running to and from,
Grese
and she could
accompanied
not
one
count them
transport
properly.
from Auschwitz to
Her other
Ravensbrück,
specialty,
then
large
to
stone above their heads in
Bergen-Belsen,
each
arriving
hand,
in March
and if they faltered,
1945.
she would beat them.
Those who
On one
collapsed got
occasion,
shot.
gave strict orders to
Prisoners
return all
received
sorts of
almost
things
no
produced
food
out
during
of these
these
blankets
marches
at
or
once.
upon
And prisoners who
arrival.
had these things in their
At
possession were
Bergen-Belsen,
brutally
daily
whipped.
food rations
In addition
consisted
to a
of
whip,
watery
Chris's
turnip
favorite
soup
habit
and
was
a
to
tiny
beat
piece
women
of bread.
until they were bleeding
No
and fell
water
to the
for
ground,
washing,
and then
barely
kicked them as
enough for
hard. A woman who was
drinking.
talking to her daughter
The camp was
over
so
the wire fence
overcrowded
between the
that
two
during
compounds.
winter, prisoners
Grese
slept
beat
sitting
and
up
kicked
on
actions
floors,
of veteran
sharing
female
only
inmates for
200
gas
blankets
chambers.
among tens of thousands.
With her lover, when the
In
women
March
were sent to the gas
1945,
chambers,
between
Grese
250
entered that up in her
and
books
300
as
prisoners
special
died
and
daily
expected
from
like cattle
starvation,
to be
thirst,
selected
and
whether they were
typhus.
fit enough to work in Germany
Even here,
or only
facing
run away.
imminent defeat,
She would bring her back
Grese
to give her a
continued
beating.
her reign of terror.
When she saw relatives trying to get
Beat
together and leave
kicked
them lying on
starved
the
prisoners,
ground.
forced them
The
to
female
kneel
prisoners
holding
that tried to
stones
escape
overhead,
such selection
and made
to the
them
place
stand for
and were
hours
then
in
put back in
snow,
their lines
ice,
again.
and rain from 3
During
a.m.
one
to
such
9
selection,
a.m.
when 2 girls
While
after
people
the war,
died all around
Alice
her,
learned the reason
Grese
Grese had
stripped
saved her
female
so many
prisoners and
times
beat them
was
with
because she
rubber
looked like
truncheons.
huge dogs that she
She
starved.
forced women into
Survivors
punishable
recalled her riding around the camp on a
marching,
bicycle
running,
with the dogs.
and frog jumping until they
Those who
collapsed
could not
from
keep up with a
exhaustion.
column, she ordered the
About
dogs to
2
attack.
weeks before British
On one end of
troops
the camp,
arrived,
the
she was
female
seen
prisoners
beating a girl
hesitated
with a riding
and lost
crop.
control of their wagon.
On Liberation's
Throwing
Eve,
stones over the
she
whole
knocked
area.
together the heads of
One
2
survivor later
sisters who were
testified
eating
what
potato
happened
scraps
afterward
from the camp
to escape
kitchen.
their fangs. but the
Despite
trained
working at
killers
Bergen-Belsen
easily
only
overtook them.
3.5 weeks,
The dogs
she
were
earned the
temp-
nickname
her
the
eyes were
Beast of
bloodshot.
Belsen.
The sight of blood
Justice
seemed to
delivered.
intoxicate her.
April 17,
Sometimes when Grese
1945,
went out with her
2
working
days after
parties,
liberation,
she used to beat women
British
and kick them
forces
with her heavy
arrested
top at the
Irma
wire
Grese,
fence where they
along
were
with
working
Joseph
to make it
Kramer
appear
and
that they
other
were
Nazi
attempting to
criminals.
escape. And when
Grese
one was that they
and
had been
female
sent over
SS guards
deliberately,
were
Grese
temporarily
gave evidence
imprisoned
at
in
an
a
inquiry
Wehrmacht Panzer
against the
training
scar.
academy,
Irma
3
also had a
kilometers
choice
from
of the
Belsen.
finest clothing from all
When
over
an
Europe.
English journalist
Grese had
asked
her
why
dress
she
as tailored
committed
was
these
particularly
crimes,
fond of a sky
Grese
blue jacket with
shamelessly
a dark blue
replied,
tie.
"It was our
Irma
duty
would
to
spend hours
exterminate
in movie star.
antisocial elements
Grese
so that
once declared,
Germany's future would be
after the
assured."
war, I'm going to be
The
it.
Belsen
However,
trial
she
began
was
September
wrong.
17,
Irma Grese
1945.
left Auschwitz on the
When
18th of
witnesses
January to the
testified
Auschwitz
she was the
Concentration Camp
worst
complex,
SS woman
and the
in
SS
camp.
began evacuating
Grese claimed
Auschwitz
they
and
were
its
all
subcamps.
lying and exaggerating,
Witches.
making an
The
elephant
prisoners
out of a
had to
small
march over
fly.
long distances
She
under
admitted
guard
to
and
beatings,
a large
but
number of
denied killing
Ravensbrück
anyone.
prisoners in March
Her lies
1945.
failed completely.
Those who collapsed,
November 17,
and there was no food when they arrived at the camp
1945,
either.
the British military
According to the
tribunal
inmates who were
sentenced
lucky enough
Irma
to
Grese
survive,
to
it
death
consisted
by
of
hanging.
watery soup
She
made
was
from a
22
variety of
years
turnips
old.
cooked in water,
December
and
13,
tragic conditions at
1945,
Bergen-Belsen were terrible.
British
And there was no
executioner
water
Albert
for washing,
Pierpoint carried
and
out the
hard proud
sentence in
that during the
Hamelin
winter
Prison's
months when it
courtyard.
was freezing cold,
Grese walked
the prisoners
to the
had to
gallows,
sleep in a sitting
and her
position
final
on the
word
blankets
was
in a camp
schnell,
of tens of
German
thousands
for
of
quickly.
prisoners. In March
Irma Grese
1945,
became the
due
youngest
to
woman
average daily
executed
mortality
under
rate of the
British law in the
prisoners
20th
was between
century.
250
Nobody
and
shed
300.
tears for the
Words
Hyena of
were so
Auschwitz.
dirty and ill
The
until the
story
bitter
of Irma
end.
Grace stands as
Even
a
also
chilling
making them
reminder
kneel
of how
and hold
ordinary
stones
people
over
can
their
transform
heads.
into monsters
They were also
when
forced
hatred
to
is
stand
normalized
free
and
to 9
cruelty is
a.m.
rewarded.
Despite the
She
fact
wasn't
that people
born
were
evil.
dying all
She was
around her
made
bag and
evil
beating
by
them with a rubber
ideology,
truncheon, but she would also
circumstance,
submit
and
them to
choice.
punitive physical exercises
If this video
in which
opened your eyes
until they
to the
collapsed from
darkest
exhaustion.
chapters of military history,
About a
then
fortnight
do
before the
3
British
things
troops
right now.
arrived, eating a girl
First,
with a riding
smash
crop.
that like button.
Upon the
It
eve of
helps this
liberation,
crucial history
Grese knocked
reach
together
more
the
people.
head. Even though she worked at the
Second,
camp for
subscribe to
only
History of
3.5
Army
weeks,
and hit the
she was so
notification
cruel.
bell so you never miss our deep
1945.
dives
2
into
days after
untold military
Bergen-Belsen's
stories.
liberation, Irma
Third,
Grese was
share
criminal
this video.
colleagues such as
The
Joseph
world
Kramer,
must never
the commandant
forget
of
what happened when
Auschwitz-Birkenau,
humanity
and the
failed.
last commandant of Bergen-Belsen,
Drop a comment below
were
telling
temporarily
us what
imprisoned
historical
in a
figure
Wehrmacht
or
Panzer
military
training
event
academy.
you want us to
About
cover
the
next.
time when she was
We
interviewed
read
by an
every
English
single
journalist
comment
who asked her
and
why she had
take your
committed the crime
suggestions
she
seriously.
had. It was our
Remember,
duty
those
to
who forget
exterminate
history
antisocial
are doomed
elements.
to repeat it.
So that Grese,
Stay
when she was
informed,
tried at the
stay
Belsen trial,
vigilant,
which
and
began
we'll
on the
see you in the
17th of
next
September
episode of History of Army,
1945, SS
where we
woman in the
continue
camp,
bringing you the
Grese responded
unfiltered
that they were all
about
lying,
warfare and
exaggerating,
military history.
and making